Hello and welcome to Unacademy. I welcome you all to the Hindu analysis. We'll be discussing 5 to 6 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. The paper is quite interesting, GS paper 3 driven. But before we begin, as always, remember 29,999, 22,999 plus 1 month's free extension offer is going to end today. If you have ever thought of joining Unacademy, this may be the right time. Use the code IAS English to be tagged to our team. That is extremely important in that regard. Good morning. The PPT of yesterday's session has already been uploaded. Today's session also will be uploaded into this Telegram channel. Just have to subscribe to it. You will get all the updates there, and the PPT or PDF will be shared within the next 1 to 2 hours once the session is over. Now, if we look at a Friday newspaper, generally has a metro section. Therefore, you have two to three different sections not there, but we have a very interesting text and context article. You will not find this in regional editions, only in Delhi edition and metropolitan editions. Then we have the International Court of Justice giving an advisory opinion on climate change, equally interesting. Then we'll talk about groundwater contamination. This comes from the science page. Again, something very specific to metropolitan editions. You'll not find it in every edition. That is why I don't give page numbers, because according to the edition which you get, the page numbers will differ. Then we'll talk about Philippines and India. And in the end, something which we had predicted and suspected yesterday with regards to the cloudburst in that area, in Uttarkashi or Uttarakhand, there is now more data coming through. And as it turns out, it may not be a cloudburst. We'll talk about that. But the first three are extremely heavy articles. And as we did yesterday, I'll give you a structure in which you can learn it, a structure in which you can understand everything and use it for the examination also in that regard. Now, with this, let's look at the first topic, which is the Indian economy perfectly balanced? Now, this is a very interesting question because the text and context article challenges this, or rather, has a lot of data to share, which you may use for a critically analyzed question. For a critically analyzed question, you may use this data. Now, there are 3 to 4 very interesting things. One is the context. Why are we having this discussion? There's a statement which was given by the finance ministry. Then we'll talk about, is it really the case? And if it isn't, what data supports it? So therefore, you have one picture which is rosy and complete, wherein the finance ministry has just argued that India's economy is in the Goldilocks situation. Goldilocks situation, or Goldilocks, is used as a word for planets when they're in the right position vis-a-vis their star or sun and have the right conditions to sustain life. This word comes from there. But a Goldilocks situation for an economy means three things together. First, moderate growth, which is 4 to 6%, maximum 7%. Subdued inflation, which is again 2 to 4%, maximum 6%, which is plus minus 2. 4% is considered to be subdued inflation. And supported or supportive monetary conditions. Monetary conditions would be money circulation, or the money which is circulating is in that context that it is not fueling inflation in that regard. So monetary policy, again, RBI has very well managed it. Yesterday itself, MPC did not change the repo rate. But the idea is Goldilocks situation in an economy. Now, this is very important for you because you may need this word for the examination. When we talk about Goldilocks situation or Goldilocks zone for an economy, inflation plus growth plus monetary policy, if all are in the right zone, accommodative zone, if you want to say, then it is called Goldilocks. This is what the finance ministry has argued. This is what a lot of experts have argued, that with 7.6% GDP growth and India poised to again reach 3.6 trillion economy and thereafter also get 7% growth, there's a rosy picture which has been argued that we are very comfortable. We are very comfortable. However, a certain set of experts have argued that we need to contextualize this Goldilocks zone, this inflation, this growth, and this monetary policy. And is it really the case in that regard? Now, please understand one thing very clearly. You are preparing for UPS. You want to become a government servant. You want to, mostly students forget that they are government and servant. Servant part nobody remembers, but the government part also should not be something you should forget. Which means that if a question about the governmental policy comes through, or about the situation of the economy comes through, or in a way you have been asked an opinion, never become too negative. Meaning, as much as I'm giving you now a contextualized understanding, all of this has to be used in a very, very specific way, and that too in a very judicious way. Cannot criticize the government left, right, and center in an answer and then expect to get good marks. Because the person who's checking the paper also is a person who is either a government servant or has been employed by the government. So I hope that you realize this aspect, that there is a need to balance. And that mid path can only come through if you know both. So I have given you the positives here. The government claims that we are in Goldilocks situation. In an ideal situation where the question is not asking you what is called as a critical analysis, what should be your stance here? If it is saying that there is a gold, the statement says we are in a Goldilocks zone. Discuss. What should be a stance for that type of question? When it does not use the word critically analyze, what should be a stance? Come on. The stance has to be positive with the conclusion being cautionary. That as much as we have, no, the tone of the question is positive, you stand by a positive question. Meaning the tone of the question says positive, so you have to remain positive with a balance or a cautionary, you can say, line in the conclusion so as to balance the answer. Remember this point. If the tone of the question is negative, you stand with negative, but then balance it in the conclusion by giving a cautionary word or something counter. The neutral when it is a critically analysis question. Remember this point. Critical analysis question, you have to stand by neutral. In a positive, you have to stand by positive. Negative, you have to stand by negative. Just balancing it in the last line. Meaning, don't take an opposite stance. I'm telling you this because you're starting your preparation. In multiple cases, you will get a lot of, and the Hindu newspaper has this very big problem that in multiple cases, it will have such articles which will tend to criticize the government too much. So therefore, we have to then balance it. This is not a problem with Indian Express, but Hindu has this issue. And therefore, we have to balance it. So are we clear about this point? Whatever I'm going to discuss from henceforth is with a disclaimer. Don't use it to destroy a good answer in which a positively understood economic outlook has been asked. If I can get a yes on that, yes, sir, we understand the disclaimer, then I will complicate this Goldilocks concept. As per the finance ministry, have good inflation. We are in a very good situation with regards to inflation. Our growth is also positive and in the right direction. And the monetary policy is also accommodative and we are in the right context. This is called the Goldilocks situation according to the government of India. And thereby we stand by that also if the examination or examiner is asking us that. Now, the article refutes or challenges or complicates this Goldilocks concept via four indicators. The first indicator is PI and the concept of CFP, meaning the indicator which is being used for inflation, according to the article, is the Consumer Price Index General, CPI General. Now, what the article argues is CPI General is not a good indicator of inflation because it does not take into account food as a basket percentage, meaning as a percentage of taking, you can say, the inflation data, food is not given that much preference in CPI general. So whilst you can see the blue line which is constantly going down, with regards to CPI general, and has always been between this 4 to 6%, you can say, bracket. The argument which is being pushed through is, if we take into account consumer food price index, which is a more, you can say, price sensitive and impacts us more, then we get a totally different picture. Only recently it has gone under the CPI. However, it has generally been at least 2 to 4% higher than higher than the CPI data in that. And therefore, the argument which is being pushed through is that the data which is being used by the government of India to say that the inflation is in a way extremely in a very moderate zone, it is within a certain zone, is not the right indicator itself, because when we take into account food and when we take into account food inflation, which has been more high and volatile, it further leads to either the purchasing power of the common citizen way, and has been there because of systemic issues, because of monsoonal rains, because of flooding, unseasonal rains, and supply chain disruptions. So the first argument, I'll see again, all of this data cannot be produced by you in the examination. So what is the conclusion? Conclusion is CPI data is not indicative. CFPI data is more indicative, and CFPI data has been higher than CPI. Therefore, food inflation has been more volatile and higher than inflation generally, which means that the purchasing power of the people has been impacted, and therefore the Goldilocks zone first indicator is artificial. Is artificial. Uh, Sham, we'll get that sorted. Don't worry. In the end, you can just write this again. I'll get it sorted. So the first the first thing is, purchasing power is not in the right zone, because of the CFPI indicator. So what we have first established, very simply, understand this. You don't have to learn this. Understand this. CPI is the finance ministry's indicator to say that we are in a Goldilocks. On the other hand, the economists are saying that is not a true indicator. Look at food price index and you will realize that there is a erosion of purchasing power of the common citizen, because food prices have increased more than other essential goods. Do we understand this point? Do we understand this point? That CPI is not a true indicator, CFPI is the right indicator. Yes, we understand this? Okay. Yes or no? Everybody has to consent. So do we need to explain the rationale for artificial? Manisha, artificial, distorted are words which will be acceptable. Will be acceptable, right? Rationale for using food inflation is because if you look at the lower income groups, 50% of their expenditure goes into food. That is one of the reasons why food indication is very, very important. So food prices are more sensitive to lower income groups, which is the majority of the population, because 50% of their income goes into food only. Okay. So everybody is saying we understand this, sir, because 50% of the income of a lower income group goes into food. Food inflation has been higher than CPI generally. Therefore, there is an erosion in purchasing power, and that will come out in different ways. For example, what happens is, if you have a lot of food inflation, people tend to reduce their dietary consumption. The quality of dietary consumption also goes down. Now, what is more dangerous than the first is the second indicator. If I add the CFPI data with this indicator, I get an even more alarming perspective. See, there are two words. One is called nominal income, and the other one is called real income. The difference between nominal and real in this context, in this perspective, is when you adjust your nominal income for inflation, you get real income. For example, I may be getting 1 lakh rupees, 1 lakh rupees in Delhi, and I may be getting 1 lakh rupees in Agra, but my nominal income is same. But my real income is different because in Delhi, inflation may be more or the prices may be more. So my overall saving may be only 10,000 rupees because the commute is very expensive, the food is very expensive, the rents are more. On the other hand, in Agra, that may not be true. So same nominal income may not always translate into same real income. So therefore, when in this context we inflation adjust the nominal incomes since 2019, we get an even more alarming development. See, the first column, the red column, as you can see, maps the average salary increase or appraisals. Average salary in nominal terms since 2019. Herein you can see 8.6, 4.4, 8, 9.4, 9.2, 9, 8.8. Now, if we adjust this increase for inflation, I get a totally different wherein this 8.6 average salary increase only translates as 5% when adjusted for inflation. But what is more dangerous is in 2020 it was negative if adjusted for inflation. And an 8.8% increase or 9% increase in salary only translates to 4 or 3% increase in salary in real terms. Therefore, the real wages have either stagnated or are growing very slow. But the aspirants here who would be from the IT sectors, manufacturing sector or consumer sector would know that these type of appraisals are unrealistic in those sectors. Average increase in an IT sector or any other allied sector in a tertiary sector is maximum 4% to 5%, much lower than that also sometimes. And therefore, if you look at it, if a 9% actually is adjusted to 3.6% and your increase is only 4%, more or less, your real income is either contracting or is stagnant. And this is what is called the silent squeeze. The silent squeeze is that with incomes not growing in real terms, only in nominal terms, there is less disposable income for the people. Now, add to it food inflation. Food prices are going up. Your income is stagnant or contracting. So now what will happen is both of these things together are going to then lead to three things. First, less disposable income. Second, dietary, you can say quality of diet is going to change. And third, your purchasing power is going to. And if your quality of diet is going to change, it will further lead to disease and malnutrition. So if you actually look at it, the living standards and the health condition of our people is not just an indicator of what is happening in the health sector, but food inflation and disposable income, food inflation and real income together is not able to translate into the right space in that. Now, do you understand how these two things complicate this Goldilocks understanding? Goldilocks say inflation is very good, monetary policy is perfect, GDP growth is also very good. What we have complicated through is first, as it turns out, CFPI was higher, therefore food was more expensive than what it was, and my real income has not been increasing only. When real income is not increasing, I have less disposable income. Therefore, I am either cutting out on essential goods, and that would mostly explain why most of the iPhone, most of the cars, most of the houses are on debt based understanding or on loans, because people's purchasing power has contracted, but inflation has increased. Therefore, what we see is this Goldilocks zone is an illusion. Now let's further complicate. First two aspects clear. Very logical, very well written article, tells you everything in the best way possible. Are we sorted with regards to these two things? Yes. Okay. Now the third, food inflation is always dependent on their climate. Food inflation is not always dependent on climate. It is also based on supply chain disruptions. It is based on season. It is based on international prices. It is based on export and import and global trade also. So food inflation may not always be about climate in that, right? Okay. The third is something called the Gini coefficient. On the same platform in CNA, I have once discussed the problems of how the WHO, or rather the WTO and the World Bank, the way they calculate Gini coefficient is problematic. But just to refresh your memory, the Gini coefficient is based on a graph in which you put national income here and you put population here. And thereafter, 0 means perfect equality, 1 means perfect inequality, meaning everybody is unequal if 1, everybody is equal if it is 0. So you want to be more closer to 0. And mostly, if there's a gap, that is called the inequality gap or the Gini coefficient in that. Now, just to refresh your memory, mostly this data which you see here, 0.489, which is the Gini coefficient for India, which has gone down to 0.402, which shows that inequality has been decreasing in India. Look around you. Is inequality in India decreasing? Yes or no? Give me an honest answer. Look around you. Gini coefficient is saying that inequality in India is decreasing. If you look around yourself, is inequality decreasing in India? And the simple, straightforward answer is no. Simple, straightforward answer is no. Vignesh, it has not come through. Maybe tomorrow we'll get a better article. Nothing related to the merchant shipping bill today. So, the simple, straightforward answer is no. Then, how can it be that the Gini coefficient is going down? It is coming closer to 0, but we see inequality. And in that article, which had come 2 weeks back, it was argued that the way we calculate Gini coefficient is already problematic, how the World Bank does it. Why? Because it does not take into account national income based on income. It takes on consumption. Meaning they capture consumption data to then determine national income. And a very simple point which I made that day also was that consumption is always not a good indicator of income. Meaning, when your income goes up, your consumption may not go up automatically. There's a gap. Because if your income goes up, you would like to save more money rather than consuming. Therefore, Gini coefficient, as it is calculated today by the World Bank and the data which is used here also, is flawed because it takes into account consumption, does not take into account the real income in that regard. Further, it can never capture the consumption of ultra rich, uber rich, super rich, because what they consume, we don't even know. We don't know in what plate, in what spoon, what food are the industrialists having their food in. So there may be some form of consumption which is either laundered, either shown as tax rebates. We never can capture the consumption of the ultra rich. Therefore, this data itself is problematic. But this article says even if we take it on case to case basis, on face value, even if we take it on face value, the biggest issue of Gini coefficient in India is it only takes into account the formal sector. Formal sector means a person who is employed in a certain company or in a certain form of mostly self-employed are not considered to be part of formal. But if in your employment there are safety nets, you get insurance, you get health insurance, you get term insurance, some form of social security within an employment is being used as an indicator of formal economy. Now, what Gini coefficient does is it does not take into account most of the informal sector. And in the post pandemic world, where certain sectors are going up, certain sectors are going down. That is called the K-shaped curve or recovery, which we are seeing. And 96% of our labor, mostly in the informal sector, this is not a true indicator of inequality or growth in that regard. So, food inflation is going up, real income is going down or is remaining stagnant, and Gini coefficient is not capturing the reality. Now, in that context, are we in the Goldilocks zone? Okay. Sir, I am still not convinced. Give me one more reason to question the Goldilocks. Okay. Let's go to the fourth indicator. The fourth indicator, which is used by the article to argue that we are in a Goldilocks, we are not in a Goldilocks zone, or there is a certain way to complicate it, is by looking at the deficits. See, the government has to be fiscally prudent. There has to be fiscal discipline, meaning how it spends and how it takes, you can say, get its receipts, its income and its expenditure should be responsibly there. That is called fiscal prudence and fiscal responsibility of a government. Now, if you go by the different indicators, fiscal deficit, which has been falling, the revenue deficit, which has also been falling, the primary deficit, which is again falling, and effective primary deficit, which is again falling, which means your fiscal deficit is total expenditure minus revenue receipts plus capital receipts, which are non-debt imposing, meaning anywhere you actually create an asset, but you don't get a receipt through debt, meaning if it is increasing your debt liability, it is not a good receipt, and therefore it is not calculated in fiscal deficit. So total expenditure minus revenue receipt plus capital receipts, which are not debt imposed. This is being falling. Further, revenue deficit means revenue expenditure minus revenue receipt, which are consumptive and non-asset produced. Revenue receipt is one of the best forms of receipt. Thereafter, primary deficit is when from the fiscal deficit you exclude interest payments, meaning payments which you've been making over years for loans which you had taken previously. Namita. And last is effective revenue deficit, when within revenue deficit, loans taken for asset production or asset production, which is called creation of capital assets, that is reduced. It is called effective revenue deficit. This is pure static economics for you. You can use this to understand it. Fiscal, primary, effective primary, and the concept of revenue deficit. The argument which is being pushed through the article is the government is doing two things at the same point. Its fiscal space is reducing, meaning it has to meet the targets which are indicated via the FRBM Act. And thereafter, what is more problematic here? What is more problematic is not that high deficits which are reducing will lead to crowd out effect. Crowd out effect is when the government borrows too much from the market cannot lend further. Therefore, private sector will not get a lot of investment or a lot of credit in that regard. That is not the problem. The problem is all these deficits don't take into account one very interesting ratio, which is public debt to GDP ratio, meaning how much debt we have to the GDP. And that is where the real indicator is. It stands at 81% vis-a-vis a target which has been put at 60, which means that most of our growth is debt based. Meaning we are borrowing to grow. What this 7.6% growth means is we are borrowing, then growing. Therefore, there is more and more interest liability. If you are buying everything through borrowing, is it real growth? Is it real growth? And if I have to pay more and more interest later, my fiscal and primary deficit are going to become more and more skewed in that regard. Now, in the past half an hour, I've given you a lot of information. Some of you may be following it, some of you may be somewhere in between. Now, the question is, sir, what to do with this information? what to do with this information. Organized and yeah, formal sector mostly used interchangeably. Can I consolidate all of this in one slide? Therefore, you can use it in the examination, create an argument. And what does all of this imply? Because all of this data cannot be remembered for the examination. I have just created the argument in. Now I am simplifying it for the examiner. Okay. Government claim. What is the government's claim? The government's claim is inflation is moderate, growth is positive and 7.6%, and the monetary indicators are positive. This together they call it as the Goldilocks situation. Very good. According to governmental policy. Now, we have to question this based on what indicate, right? Why the government is an illusion? Because it controls narrative. Because you need a, you can say, positive outlook for the markets to remain positive. Now, the first question is, how am I calculating inflation? The government uses CPI. However, we get a divergent view if we look at CFPI, which says food inflation has been higher than inflation generally, which means this translates as lower purchasing power. Second indicator is real income growth, which indicates to us based on nominal income has been increasing, but real income, which is adjusted for inflation, it is either decreasing or has remained constant, which means that purchasing power either reduced or remained same. Thereafter, third indicator, formal economy only accounted for inequality calculation, which is Gini coefficient is problematic. And fourth is fiscal space or leverage has been reducing, plus debt to GDP ratio is very, very, very high. Growth based on borrowing. Now, does this make sense? Because then I will give you a conclusion. And that conclusion is going to be very important for the examiner. Now, does this article make sense? Yes, Gini based on consumption, not on income. I'm just relying on the data which is given to me in this article. I want everybody's yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are following. These are complicated concepts. GS paper 3, pure microeconomics and macroeconomic indicators. This is more microeconomic. Right. Yes, which is true, Manisha. True. Okay. Very good. Quick. Have to be quick. Don't sleep. Okay. Now, therefore, what is the conclusion? Volatile food inflation plus persistent income disparities plus stagnant real income reduces purchasing power plus, you would say, tight fiscal space equals to growth, inflation, and monetary policy along with fiscal policy, which is strained, or rather, will say, is under stress. And Goldilocks zone, most probably, it is much more complicated. Make sense? Everyone, make sense? This is basically the conclusion. Regarding high FPI, how is it not wise to open our markets to US? Because US agricultural products, as see, firstly, you are bringing in the US agri products are not going to really compete with our agricultural products. It is our exports to the US market which is more important, because they have their own phytosanitary and sanitary obligations in that regard. And if, in a way, in a globalized world where we are having, if US can in a way reduce the prices somehow, it can then challenge, or cheaper imports can then challenge the small micro enterprises which are trying to produce or trying to compete in India. See, Amul, Nandini are very big players, but in India not everybody is consuming, and not every state has an Amul or a Nandini. There are there are small, you can say, players also. We have dairy sector which is dotted by mostly producers who are very small or are medium enterprises. They will not be able to compete. That space will be wiped out. So CFPI, we may not have anything to do with this. But why US agri products are problematic? Because they will complicate our market in that. Yes, the domestic agricultural market, but small players, MSMEs, will be destroyed. Maybe self-help groups will be destroyed. That is the idea. Now, if they ask you a question, this question has been directly picked up from the statement given in the newspaper, which is India's finance ministry declared that India's economy to be in a Goldilocks situation, a rare alignment of moderate growth, subdued inflation, and supportive monetary condition. Do you agree? I could have given you a critically analysis question also. Do you agree question? Never tell them what you think of. Do you agree means you have to now give them positive, negative, and end on positive only. Meaning you give both perspectives. For the negative perspective, I have given you this data. That is the whole point of this. Right? So, very insightful article, very interesting also, because has a lot to tell us on how the indicators change our perspective in. Clear, everyone? Trade growth, but it is not backed by authentic data. Don't use the word authentic. The data indicators are problematic. That is the word which you have to use. What data set you pick up is the real problem, which is that uh, I can pick up only certain selective data to argue that I'm in a very good zone. Okay, everybody saying yes, sir. We can move to the next topic. I hope this structure is working for you. I keep on giving you multiple small packets of revision, and we can keep on using this data in the best way possible for the exam. Right? Okay. So we have understood, as a certain way of revising, what is the governmental claim and four things which complicate that claim. Now let's look at the second topic. Now the second topic is based on a recent judgment, or rather, not even say judgment, a recent opinion which has come from the International Court of Justice. So, the International Court of Justice in Hague, Netherlands, has a certain type of, you can say, a mini judgment or whatever you want to call it, an opinion, which is called an advisory opinion. If certain matters go to it, it can give an opinion. Now, please do understand one thing: advisory opinions are not legally binding on anyone. It is just an opinion. It is believed, it has moral force, and it has legal, you can say, precedence, or a certain legal, you can say, push. It is a way in which the ICJ gives a certain opinion which can then be used to create international pressure. Meaning, whatever I'm discussing with you is not a judgment of the ICJ. It is just an opinion of the ICJ, which means that it is just interpretive, and it is to influence the behavior of the countries. Meaning, if if something goes to a certain country, or if there is the Paris Climate Agreement, if there are COPs of different agreements happening, if there's a need to look at a larger supra body and its opinion, now this opinion stands. This opinion is much like your parents' opinion, advisory in nature. You may or may not follow it, and it just creates moral pressure on you and can be used by them to give legal precedent. It's a take it or leave it, but they are going to give you some advice for sure. Same way ICJ is giving advice. Okay, we have been observing everything related to climate change. This is our opinion on the following matters. May or may not follow it. That is totally your call. So, will the US, will China, will most of the polluters going to say, no, no, ICJ has said something, we have to follow it? No, no one cares. Literally no one. As it is in climate justice, no one really cares. So it has been made a big thing through this article, but you and me know that in reality, Trump is Trump, climate haters are haters, climate deniers are deniers. Will this advisory opinion do anything? No. It may create more pressure on India because we would be asked to abide by these principles now. So, what I'm trying to do here to you is I'm trying to desensitize you to these types of advisory opinions, not quoting them in the examination like God's word. These are advisory opinions. Do we understand the nature of this advice? Non binding, opinion based advice to be used for moralistic pressure and for international precedence when it comes to laws. Yes? Okay. Yes. It actually develops more pressure on developing countries. Very good, Anu. Very good. Now, the World Court, as it is called, the ICJ, has ruled or has given advice on multiple things. Now, systematically, I'm going to tell you what did they say. The first thing which they talked about is they wanted to interpret what this 2 degrees Celsius, 1.5 degrees Celsius means. Meaning, be it the UNFCCC, be it Kyoto Protocol, be it Paris Agreement, for the first time, a set of judges sat down and interpreted what below 2 degrees Celsius means, and pursue the efforts to limit 1.5 degrees Celsius. You know that it is believed that if we go above 1.5 degrees Celsius to 2 degrees Celsius, and to give you, if this is not news to you, we've already reached 1.1 degrees Celsius in that regard. The earth will go into a certain cycle where there will be irreversible damage which will happen, and global warming will then go into a tailspin. So here in this 2 till 2 degrees Celsius we can reverse. After that we may not be able to. Now, the ICJ has argued, the World Court has argued that based on all scientific data and consensus, the COPs should hold 1.5 degrees Celsius as the threshold. Meaning every time we meet, we increase this to 2 degrees. No. 1.5 degree is the target which every state should hold on to. Will they hold on to it? But this confusion which had been created in multiple COPs have now been sorted. World Code says 1.5 degrees Celsius is our target, not 2 degrees. Not 2 degrees. This is the first thing. Second, if you know within the UNFCCC, there's something called nationally determined contribution, meaning every country voluntarily, in a non binding way, tells the COP, we will do this to then reverse climate change, mitigate climate change, sequester carbon, create carbon sink, create a carbon market. These are called NDCs as they're called. Now, the ICJ says that though they are not legally binding obligations on the state, the ICJ rules that it is the duty and due diligence, cooperation, and NDCs should reflect highest possible ambition and reasonable capability of meeting. So the NDCs should, though they are not legally binding, still the state has the duty to meet the NDC. Interesting. Doesn't really change anything. But now I have the World Bank telling me that it is my duty. I would like the ICJ to say this to Trump. Please cooperate, do due diligence to your NDCs, and reasonable capability use it to meet it. So again, it is an advisory, and therefore it's totally on the nation states to do due diligence. And we know how modern nation states are. Okay. For India, one thing is good, which is that this moralistic imperative, yes, has argued that common but differentiated responsibility along with respective capabilities is something which is to be held. Meaning the concept that India and China has to have to do more than US is out of the window. ICJ says that common but differentiated is a principle which has to be held for climate change in that. Again, this is to be held by the North, global North, by the industrial power, by the colonial powers, and again, nobody really cares. Thereafter, in a place where India used to find a loophole, when we used to say that if UNFCCC and Kyoto Protocol comes through, all other international and environmental laws go out of the window. ICJ has said no. Even when you have to mitigate climate change and you have to do diligence, and if you have to follow a protocol, still international laws, be it the Sea Convention, be it international law, be it environmental laws, they stand. But what is most interesting is that it has argued that even if you leave a certain protocol, you are not exempted by the climate related obligations. This is for the US, that human rights have to be honored. Now, if you look at all of this, big things coming from a big organization, coming from a Eurocentric European organization, which always will do this advisory decision, with the EU may actually follow, but no one else will. Now, what is the conclusion here? सुनने में बहुत अच्छा लगा, but what is the conclusion? Conclusion. Can I tell you the conclusion, which you can use now? Conclusion. Can I conclude? What are the 4 principles which have been established by the ICJ which have to be followed? You can use it in the examination, sprinkle it around. Now, ICJ through its advisory opinion, has argued four things. First, target is 1.5 degrees Celsius, not 2 degrees Celsius. Second, common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities is to be followed. Right? Third, international law, environmental law all stand irrespective of protocol. And fourth, human rights are above international organizations, so obligations remain. Now, this is what you have to use for the examination. Will you be able to do that? Yes. If you want to add fifth, NDCs are not to be ignored, should be duty of state. Sorted, everyone? 5 conclusions which we can use from this article. Yes? Perfect. Okay. Now, first 2 articles done. I told you heavy articles these are. First, we complicated Goldilocks. Second, we have complicated. Third one is international law, environmental law should stand irrespective of the protocol being followed. Be it Montreal Protocol, be it Kyoto Protocol, be it any protocol, or be it any a multilateral organization, UNFCCC, CBD, whatever it is. Right, Anisha? Okay. Now, this comes from the science page. Again, very interesting that it is talking about groundwater contamination and chronic illness. This is a very heavy article. Very heavy article. Means if I tell you, read it and give me the gist of it, it will take you 45 minutes to do it. Why? Because it is very heavy. It has a lot of data. It has a lot of, you can say, not just data, but a lot of information, facts. So what I've done for you is, because you will get this PPT, I have simplified everything and made it into tables, which you can then use for the examination and understand and revise quickly. Now, the premise of this article is that though we have rivers and seasonal monsoon, 85% of all drinking rural water and 65% of all irrigation is done via groundwater. Groundwater would be the water which seeps through the soil and becomes a freshwater resource underground over centuries, over decades. Now, groundwater pollution is something which we don't really talk about. We talk about water pollution, but as soon as I talk about water pollution, the first image which will come to your mind is a river, is a lake. But groundwater contamination is something which nobody really talks about. Now, the article wants to point out, going by the data which has been coming from different parts of India, groundwater contamination is becoming an epidemic and becoming a much bigger threat to the health of our citizens than any other source. Now, you will say, sir, how? See, 20% of the samples taken from 440 districts gave us indication of nitrate poisoning or nitrate contamination, meaning too much nitrogen based anthropogenic addition to water because of either fertilizers or leaching from septic tanks which are made for these toilets, there is leaching of the nitrates into the groundwater. In 9% of the samples taken from these 446, 9% of them have too much fluoride, specifically in Rajasthan, Andhra Pradesh, and Telangana, which leads to dental and skeletal fluorosis, which is too much fluoride leads to decay of the bones. In multiple districts, arsenic levels in Punjab and Bihar were far exceeding what the WHO has argued and increases the risk of cancer and neurological disorders. In Punjab, Andhra Pradesh, Rajasthan, phosphate poisoning or phosphate contamination because of fertilizers there. In Budhpur, Uttar Pradesh, 13 people recently died because of kidney related complications, because of the borewells getting contaminated by sugar and paper mills. And in Jolan, residents reported petroleum like fluids from hand pumps, and in multiple other places, the industrial plants are leaching heavy metals into the water. This is your evidence. I am not making a random claim. I am just saying this is the evidence which is coming through. Now, the question is this the only picture which we have? See, you and me are powerless. Still, we know this. In order to identify it as a public health crisis, we need a lot of data. That data is provided, and now what I've done is I've put it into tables. For example, fluoride contamination is there in 230 districts. What is the health impact? Bone deformities, stunted growth. The data which is coming, this you can ignore because this you can't use. This is coming from multiple places where WHO levels are exceeded by 100x, 1000x. It is geogenic. Geogenic means based on the geological processes. It's not an anthropogenic, which is not human based. And what is the solution? Arsenic, West Bengal, Bihar, UP, Jharkhand, Assam, skin lesions, internal cancers, again geogenic because of the mining activities, again not needed, and you need arsenic filters. All of this data is given in the article. If you see, all of this is given here. Groundwater death zones, why the crisis persists, will come to that. This data, I have put it into tables for you. Further, nitrate we see in northern India, Punjab, Haryana, Karnataka, blue baby syndrome, too much nitrogen in the blood, fertilizer, anthropogenic, improved sanitation, nitrate free water for infants. Uranium in Punjab, excessive phosphate fertilizers, heavy metals in UP, Gujarat, industrial zones, industrial discharge, sewage and septic contamination, diarrhea, hepatitis A and B, again need better infrastructure. Now you will say, sir, what to do with this information? This is your science and technology. Water pollution in groundwater, any of this, all this table intervention causes health impact and contamination. This can come as a match the following or as a statement based question. This is how the newspaper sometimes give you more static than any static book in that regard. So I hope fluoride, arsenic, nitrate, uranium, heavy metal, and sewage contamination is sorted for. All of this need this is systematization. I've made notes for you here. I hope you will use it for the examination. I hope so. Will you? Is there enough evidence given by me to tell you that there is a very big crisis? Now I have to tell you why and way forward. Can I do that? Yes. Okay. Why is there no real action being on groundwater pollution? First, institutional fragmentation. Be it all the organizations, be it the Central Pollution Control Board, State Pollution Control Board, Ministry of Justice, they all work in silos, compartments. None of them know what the other is doing. Either they're duplicating, same river is being washed, is being cleaned by the state pollution control board, also Central Pollution Control Board, also Ministry of Jal Shakti also. So they have no coordination. Weak legal enforcement, biggest issue in India. Even if I'm doing all of this, it is good. Regulatory framework is such, polluters are not punished. No real time data or accessible data. We can only wait for 2 to 3 years. If scientific studies are being done, then only we know contamination. In most parts of India, contamination may not be detected also. And over extraction. Biggest issue in India, whatever, be it geogenic toxins or be it sanitary issues, be it anthropogenics, the problem is that we are taking too much water out of from our groundwater. This is very big issue in metropolitan cities, where the groundwater levels have gone down by 100, 200, 300 meters. So these structural issues make sure that groundwater contamination remains an issue in the larger scheme of things. Now, what is our way forward? Our way forward is we need these words, coordinated, multi-dimensional strategy with regulation, technology, health, and public participation coming together. This is first. Second, we need an institutional and national framework for groundwater pollution, and we need citizen centric groundwater governance where people themselves are able to govern and administer the these basic aspects of groundwater usage. We use any of these words in the examination and you will have a very good answer for something like this, which is groundwater pollution is silent, invisible, and slow, but its damage is irreversible. Unless urgent collective action is taken, we risk learning the value of clean water only when the wells run dry. Beautiful statement out of the newspaper now becomes a UPSC question. If you don't know groundwater pollution and its risks and problem, you will not be able to answer this question. A lot of students will write a lot of things. They will say industrial discharge. That is not true for groundwater. That is for rivers. They will talk about surface runoff. That is for rivers and lakes again. This is more systemic to how agricultural practices are being done and how there's geogenic and also anthropogenic. Geogenic means earth based natural processes and processes which we do. Crop diversification suggested by economic survey reduce cultivation water intensity. Manisha, that is a very long tangent you're taking, but sure. Again, a point which may not directly go into this understanding. Crop diversification may change our understanding of how we use groundwater, but still the fertilizers remain the same. Rather, it is organic fertilizers, better fertilizers, where we are using vermicompost and all, where at least the surface, the groundwater contamination is not of nitrogen or phosphate. So it's like you are using a good tangent, but that tangent is when you're desperate to write something, not as a natural answer for this question. Right? Are we clear? Are we clear? Now only two simple topics are left, straightforward topic. Our three major topics are over. What have we understood till this point? Very, 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 very important. First, we have understood what is the concept of Goldilocks, and we have complicated Goldilocks via consumer food price index, real income, the concept of Gini coefficient, and the concept of fiscal deficits. And we argued it is a complicated relationship, not straightforward. Second, we tried to understand what the ICJ has done. Five major conclusions have been given. Say it with me. First is nationally determined contributions are should be a duty. Second, common but differentiated responsibility and respective capability should be honored. Then, then advisory opinion, remember. Then the idea that 1.5 degrees Celsius is our target, not 2 degrees Celsius. Thereafter, human rights is very, very important. And last but not the least, international and environmental laws still remain even when there are certain protocols. And the third topic we discuss is groundwater contamination. And in groundwater contamination, arsenic, nitrogen, fluoride, phosphate, heavy metals, and what is called as sewage contamination has been talked about. We've discussed the causes, discussed the diseases which are coming through, and what are the symptoms for it. And we've discussed what are the interventions. Structural issues, no coordination, the issue of excessive extraction, no legal framework, and in the end, way forward is coordinated approach. Got it? These three done. Next 10 minutes, I can finish the next two because they are not very out of the box. Three very heavy articles, very factually driven articles. I want everybody's yes here. Yes, sir, we understand this perfectly fine. Yes, you can go forward. Yes, okay. Now, recently, one of the ministers in India had said that the ASEAN was nothing but Team B of China. And one of the members of the ASEAN, Philippines, had not taken it very well. So recently, we have seen that India and Philippines are coming together, and with their president, whose visit is going to end today, Marcos Jr., multiple very important agreements have been signed, along with cultural ties being also invoked. Now, for you, what is the importance is points of cooperation. This is what is important. Though India has signed multiple strategic agreements, for Philippines, India is just the fifth strategic partner when it comes to defense. Japan, Vietnam, Australia, and South Korea are there. Now, India is also a partner, which shows India wants to engage outside the Quad when it comes to the Indo Pacific. It wants to go beyond it. Second, second, BrahMos missile is now going to be exported to the Philippines. It is going to be the first export destination because China is an adversary for both India and Philippines. And Marcos has shown more interest in taking defense hardware from India. Thereafter, tri service and Coast Guard based, you can say, strategic exchange of data and cooperation has also been shown and also been indicated. But what is even more interesting is that visa regime may be opened up and direct flights may be coming through between India and Philippines. Pharma sector and technological sector also certain agreement. What do you do with this information? Indo-Philippines relationship, points of cooperation, strategic partnership, defense exports, and you can say military exercises and economic all come together. Just use this information to write a good answer for it. Nothing out of the box, very straightforward in that. Right? Now, the last topic is something which we had talked about yesterday. This is again a repetitive topic, something which unfortunately happened in Uttarkashi. Now, you see, can anybody tell me in this headline what word has changed between yesterday and today? What word has changed? Come on. I'm checking your memory here. Yesterday and today, what is that word which has changed? Anyone? Anyone? Come on. Yes, very good. Very good. The word cloud burst has not been used. Flash flood is being somehow. Now the ISRO data is being used, argue, And this is ISRO's images which have been given yesterday. This is the Kir Ganga river which is coming from the mountain itself. And this is the village which has now gone under silt and the debris which has come through. Initially, it was argued that it was a cloudburst which increased the volume of water, which in turn led to the whole village to go under the silt and under the debris which has come. Though rescue operations are going very slow because of the way this disaster is happening, but now it is being believed that this may not have been a cloudburst. This may have been a landslide, in a way induced by the silt and debris which had got accumulated over years in this area because of urbanization. And that was brought down either because of a glacial lake. One of you yesterday talked about GLOF, glacial lake outburst flood. They're saying it may be that, but more evidence points out, looking at the amount of rain which has happened, rain shows that it was just the volume of water increasing, which brought down with heavy rain a lot of silt and debris. So, this may not have been a natural disaster. This may have been a man made disaster because all of this deposition was something which was in the river over years of indiscriminate urbanization, indiscriminate use of the river, and the silt which was developing in upper sector. So now we have a more complicated understanding here. It is most probably not a cloudburst. It is something where three to four things have come together, something which indicates to us that it may have been avoidable. But it was, this is again a lesson for us, and we have to learn from it. And if we don't, this is going to become the new norm in Uttarakhand, right? So before I end this session, for three very important articles: Indo-Philippines relationship and the concept related to the idea of how it may not have been a cloudburst, but a landslide because of debris and silt development or buildup. If all these 5 to 6 topics are clear, and if all this heaviness of the article is sorted, I will see you soon. Thank you. Take care and bye bye.